you can explain it far better than I. Will you take a few minutes and just give us your understanding of this, because it's going to be so enlightening to so many people. It's chi, psi, and stigma in the original language.
That's what they think it is.
Yes.
They didn't know what these symbols were. So they thought they were Greek symbols. Then they began to evolve into, let's see, what do these symbols really mean? Why would there be 3 Greek symbols into the text? Why would God put 3 Greek symbols as a mystery? Well, God is not an author of mysteries, by the way. His yoke is easy. What they thought were symbols were in reality a different script than even the Greek. God is not interested in gematria. Gematria is the process of adding numerals regarding names. Maybe you take Hillary Clinton. H is number is this, and you know, and then you add it up, see if Hillary Clinton means 666, and maybe she's the beast. Maybe it's Gorbachev, so you know, then Gorbachev, and you add 666. Gematria was a process that was used in witchcraft. God is not interested in this gematria stuff. Okay? So this developed, and then the translation started to put down 666 because they thought it was about the gematria. But if you look at the Codex Sinaiticus and the different codexes, they don't have 666. They got these symbols. Some even translated these symbols as 616. But it's not. When I first saw the Codex Vaticanus, I was literally shocked because I could read the text. It was Arabic. And as I look at it, it had these, what thought these symbols. This and this in a very kind of circular way, you know. And then you had this symbol. All right? Now this is an Arabic word. You can film it and ask an Arab, what is that word? Bism, in the name of. And this word, you can ask any Arab what that word is. Bism Allah, in the name of Allah, was on that badge that people put in their foreheads as John documented what he saw on the godly video. God showed him. And that will be the symbol of Islam, which is the 2 swords. That is a symbol in Saudi Arabia. It's a symbol of Islam from the eons of time. As a matter of fact, if you don't want to believe me, I urge you to watch a movie called Kingdom of Heaven. I don't like the movie, the outcome of the movie, that Salah ad-Din was a nice guy and the Crusades were the bad guys and that kind of thing. When he's sitting in a tent talking to the king, you will see at some point in time, pause it, when you see Salah ad-Din and his men with these badges on their arms. Because it says on the right arm, the arm is dexios. Dexios means arm and not specifically hand. The word for mark is charagma, Greek, which means badge of servitude. It's a literal badge, all right? Made out of paper, etching, cloth, that is put on the forehead, and on it is several things. It could be the name of the beast, the mark of the beast, the multitude of the beast, and being the name of the beast is the Islamic declaration they already put on their foreheads. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Or it will have Bismillah on it, and it will have the mark of the beast. It could be the crescent moon itself. All kinds of flavors that shows allegiance to the Antichrist. In fact, even the Prophet Muhammad ordered, I have it with me here, there it is. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, declared, Allah will save a man from my nation above all men in the day of judgment. When they open the registers, and the register will be as far as you can see with your sins. And then he is asked, are there any excuses for your sins? And he says, no, Lord. Do you have any excuses? He says, no. And then the Lord will tell him, you have only one good deed that you have done. And he will bring out a badge on it, and it says, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and then by this he will enter paradise. In other words, that badge will rescue the Muslim to enter into the kingdom of his heaven. where that, in reality, will enter him into eternal damnation. It's so clear. All the things that is going on with Islam, it is so clear as a whistle. The reversal of what you believe is what they believe. The antithesis of the Bible is what they believe in. Thank you.
The idea that the radical Muslims have and that Nazis had is they demonize the Jews. You know, they just turn them into demons. And I mean, this is exactly what happened in Germany. Now, can you imagine? We were enlightened people and we fell for this. Why wouldn't Muslims fall for this?
فاليهود هم اليهود، هؤلاء هم الذين يجب أن يذبحوا ويجب أن يقتلوا.
They are killing the infidels just like the preacher in the mosque told them to do. It's their duty to kill them.
تا اسرائیل از صحنه روزگار حذف نشود، این فریادها به قوت خود باقی.
I watched anti-Semitism since I was a young kid, and now the world is reaping. These eggs are hatching, and what's coming out is literally something that comes out of Nazi Germany. Same as in Nazi Germany, the Boy Scouts in Nazi Germany, we had the youth. The youth was being robbed from being youth.
I think the worst form of child abuse is teaching a child to hate. What we have on Palestinian TV and on Saudi TV over and over again are little kids being taught songs, I want to be a suicide bomber.
إذا احتجت على باب القدس أصبت بدائيا بزيم قاتلي bravo.
And the youth who are listening to this day and night, what do you expect to happen?
A Palestinian teenager showed up at a crowded West Bank checkpoint wearing a suicide bomb vest. Soldiers sent a yellow robot to hand scissors to the boy so he could cut off the vest. Once the boy was out of harm's way, the bomb vest was detonated.
And I think this is a crime that the Muslim world commits against its children. Hitler committed a crime against young Germans. Took me a long time to see that. But what the Muslims do to their own children is even worse.
They tell Arab children that Jews bake cookies with their blood.
منيح. أصلاً نحن في عندنا مهمة القيادة ولازم ننفذها بسرعة. إيه؟ شو هي؟
This is a scene from the television series Al-Shatat. It was broadcast on satellite TV stations that reach hundreds of millions of viewers.
اسمع، بدنا دم طفل مسيحي قبل الفصح. مش عم نفطير. شالوه. حدا شافكم؟ لا. متأكد؟ طبعا. معناتها خلينا نبدأ فورا.
مدام نروح على البيت.
اكرم حبيبي بعد شوي بنروح.
Throughout the Middle Ages, there was this libel that the Jews needed blood of a Christian child to make matzah. Now, of course, today the world knows this is totally libelous accusation, no connection to truth at all. Yet the Al-Shatat film was able to include a video depiction of this ancient blood libel as if this is real Jewish ideology.
There is no shame in Arab media in the degree they are ready to cover hate speech and lies, outright lies against the Western Israel.
التي تصنع الفطير من دم الأطفال الأبرياء.
This is a war of propaganda in which the same techniques of subversion that we saw earlier in the challenge posed by fascism and Nazism are repeating themselves.
The propaganda of Islam is very similar to the propaganda of Nazism. It's the same hate speech, paranoia, and us against them.
Is there a surprise coming? Is there possibly an overlooked event that precedes the ill-fated invasion attempt featured in Ezekiel 38 and 9? That's the question of the evening. And we're going to explore Psalm 83. And we're going to ask ourselves, is it possible that we've overlooked a major event in the prophetic scenario? So let's take a look at Psalm 83. It's an Asaph psalm. It says, keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. The psalmist here, the last of the Asaph psalms, it's a plea to God, to don't be still. It's calling God's attention to something of alarm. For lo, thine enemies, God, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. Get the flavor of this psalm. The psalmist is pleading to God, hey, guy, look what's happening. You're going to take some action, I assume. Keep not thy silence, O God, hold not thy peace, be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. And this is, as I say, the last of the Asaph Psalms. But now, whoever these enemies are, they're motivated by hatred of God. These enemies here are not out to take spoil. They're out to manifest their hatred of God. So let's go see what the psalmist says here. Speaking of them up there, these bad guys, they have taken crafty counsel against who? Thy people. Who are his people? Israel. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. I'll come back to that at the end, but as long as we're here, I'll just talk. Who are they? The psalmist is talking to God, and he's concerned. He says, these enemies have taken arms against thy people, Israel, and they've consulted against God, thy hidden ones. Strange phrase in the Hebrew. It really means against his hidden treasured ones. Who are they? Don't know. I harbor a private possibility that may be the raptured saints. The time application here may be post-rapture. Just a possibility that you can, in your own devotions, come to your own conclusions, see. But the psalmist continues, they, these enemies, they have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Does that sound like a clip out of Ahmadinejad's recent speeches? For they have consulted together with one consent. The enemies we're talking about have gathered, confederated out of hatred for Israel, and their goal isn't to take spoil. Their goal is to cut them, to wipe them off the map. You see the difference between that and Ezekiel 38? Night and day different. That's the very commitment of Islam, to wipe Israel off the face of the map. When I first heard Ahmadinejad say that, I rejoiced. And that's the first time I knew they were even on one of their maps. Okay. Okay. Realize the primary basis of the Confederation is this very commitment. Okay. And of course, you all have heard Ahmadinejad do his thing. And he's not the only one, but he's certainly representative of that attitude. Then he describes the list of enemies he's concerned about. The psalmist is calling to God's attention a list of people. Let's examine that. His first one he happens to mention are the tabernacles of Edom. And I'm going to suggest to you that one of the things you want to do separate from all the study is find out who the Edomites are. Because, again, this is one of those things, I don't think that there's one Bible scholar in 10, or I mean it's probably at most 1 in 10, that has any idea who the Edomites are, because we're all victims of the little maps in the back of our Bibles that are not up to date. I'll come back to that issue, I think. But anyway, we go through these things here. Tabernacles of Edom. When you study the enemies of Israel in the Bible, you'll discover, as you read, that the main number one enemy of Israel in the Bible are the Edomites. Remember Esau and Jacob? They were fighting in the womb before they're born. And you all know the story about how Jacob gets the birthright. Esau is so bitter about things, he deliberately marries into the Ishmaelite family. From that day on, the Edomites and the Ishmaelites are not discernible. They commingle. There isn't a guy today that can prove he's a son of Ishmael, because it's too complicated, and they weren't called to keep separate records. That may surprise you. But the main point is, clearly Esau becomes Edom, if you will, and when Babylon is taking Judah in captivity, Babylon comes and takes Jerusalem and Judah into captivity. The Edomites are on the periphery saying, take them, get them, get them, get them. Smash their heads against the rocks, the babies. You find that in one of the Psalms because the psalmist quotes what they did to them once. I mean, you wonder why that's in the Psalm. You have to have a little background. So anyway, the tents of Edom, for our purposes tonight, I'm just going to aver, are the Palestinian refugees. Not all of them, but Edom is included in them. Okay? And so I'll give you a little history here. The ascent into the land of Israel for Edom began in 586 BC when the destruction of Jerusalem happened by the Babylonians. And they adopt Hebron, which is about 19 miles south of Jerusalem, as their capital of their own country. Many people don't notice this. And they migrate into Idumea. And I think I've got a map that'll really make this clearer. Our little maps show Edom south and east of the Dead Sea. That's where they originally were. The Nabateans, though, drove them out of there. And Edom moves westward because there's fertile valleys and the land is actually better anyway. So they move west. And they take over Hebron and they form their own country, which on the early Roman maps of the first century BC will show a place called Idumea. That's the Greek term for Edomite. Now, there's some history here you need to know to understand what happened subsequently. Let me back up a second. When you get to the abomination of desolation, and under Antiochus Epiphanes, and that leads to the Maccabean revolt, and Israel throws off the yoke of the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire. John Hyrcanus takes over. That ushers a period of time just before the New Testament period called the time of the Hasmoneans. What you need to understand is something you can get out of Josephus, is when John Hyrcanus took over the Hasmoneans, they ruled themselves, they forced the Edomites to become Jews or die. Many people don't realize that in history. So the Idumeans, that were living in Hebron and south were forced to become, when the Jews took charge, they were forced to become Edomites. So they're forced to convert. You can imagine how sincere that was. The point is, then the Romans come, and of course we're in the Roman period, the New Testament period. You have to understand the Roman mind. The Roman mind viewed the Edomites as a kind of Jew. It's a family squabble between Esau and Jacob. So when they appoint Herod as the king, a vassal king, they thought they were appointing a near Jew. Edomite to the Roman was like an almost Jew. The Herods, of course, were Edomites. Now, so there's a whole history here that I won't take the time to get into, but the Edomites then, I could cut through it. I believe the Edomites are those who say they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. And when you study Edomites, and you need to do that for yourself, because there's a whole perception here that affects us today by getting into this background. So we're going to just move on here for now. The tents of Edom, I'll show you some pictures of the tents of Edom. And these, of course, are the refugee camps that are in the land. Here's a refugee camp of 96,000 that are in the Baca Valley. These are the tents of Edom today. They're not all Edomites, but the Edomites are among them, in other words. So let's move on for some. The Ishmaelites are pretty obvious. We know who the Ishmaelites are, right? That's the embittered Esau that marries the daughter of Ishmael named Mahalal. And that starts the Olam Ibah, which is a Hebrew term for the everlasting hatred. The hatred between Edom and Israel goes all the way to the second coming of Christ, and it's one of the things he wipes out. When you study Obadiah, if you want to get into Obadiah in the background, we'll give you more of that. Moab's pretty straightforward. I think most of us realize he was a descendant of Lot, and the Palestinian refugees in central Jordan might be a reasonable approximation today. Then we have the Hagarenes. Hagar was, of course, Egyptian. So the Hagarenes is a way of referring to the Egyptians. And so we can go on here with Gebal. There's a couple of different ways that they're Midian southeast of the Dead Sea in our view. And I could go into the background here. We'll keep moving on. Ammon, of course, is the Palestinian refugees and the northern Jordanians. In fact, Amman, Jordan, is the capital today. So there's no surprise there. And Amalek is, again, the Arabs south of Israel. Remember Agag? He was the king of the Amalekites. And remember Haman at Jester? That all goes back to the Amalekites. And, of course, the Philistines are well familiar to most of you. And, of course, that's the Palestinian refugees and the Hamas of the Gaza Strip, it would seem. And with the inhabitants of Tyre, that would be Phoenicia, or we think of southern Lebanese. You notice what's going on here. These are all the next-door neighbors around that loop that we're talking about. And so then we get Asher, which is, of course, Assyria. And today it would be Syria and northern Iraq as a region. And then the children of Lot, let's hope it'd be an arm too, but that's pretty straightforward. Okay, the psalmist now has identified, he says, Lord, these people have confederated to wipe Israel off the map. Do unto them, having identified who they are, do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kizar. These are extracts from the book of Judges where God went to war on behalf of Israel back in the book of Judges, which perished at Endor and became as dung for the earth. See, in the book of Judges, we read about how God judged those nations back there. And so there are people who say that God will not judge that way in the future. Why won't he? He has judged that way in the past. And God has not changed. And what he's done in the past, he'll do in the future. And for that reason, this is impressive demand that the psalmist is making of God. Do what you did before this time. And he goes through, do unto them as to the Midianites and so forth. He petitions God to undertake the destruction of their enemies as he did in the past. The parallel is legitimate. And the Midianites, of course, are the Arab tribe that descended from Midian, the fourth son of Abraham by Keturah. We can go into the background of all of this, but it's all in Judges, chapter 4 and 5. And and Sisera and Jabin, Sisera was the captain of the host of Jabin, and he reigned at Hazor, and he routed the army of Barak on the plain of Esdraelon and killed by Yael. That's all in Judges 4 and 5, the background. and it perished at Endor. It's, again, this is all Old Testament background that is being portrayed here. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, yea, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. Well, you need to understand that Oreb and Zeb were the prince generals of Midian. Zebah and Zalmunna were their kings. That's also the era from which they took the crescents as trophies off the camels. So they even have, strangely enough, an Islamic moon god background here. But anyway, they're defeated by Gideon, of course, and on it goes. So the point is that, oh my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth the wood, and as a flame setteth the mountains on fire. So persecute them with thy tempest, make them afraid of thy storm. Really? And fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. That's kind of interesting. Because not only are they enemies, there's a theological element here. That they may seek thy name, in contrast to what? Is that a hint again of Allah? And let's keep going here. The question is the present leadership of Israel strong enough, does he have enough backbone to take them on? That's a question. The elite corps in Israel is the tank corps. And there are those that think if Israel wanted to, well, let's back up a second. Set aside for some reason Iran's nuclear capability for the moment. There's lots of aspects to that. But there could be a window of opportunity occur in which the tank corps could just take the Hezbollah out in Lebanon and take the Hamas out in Gaza. Establish the border and say to the world, up yours. It takes a backbone. And so, let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, the psalmist pleads, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. See, apparently, the only way the world is going to know that God is for him to move in judgment. That's the thought that seems to emerge here in Psalm 83. Now, if you study Ezekiel, you'll notice in chapter 25 through 32, which is at the second coming of Christ, there are 7 people that get wiped out. Ammon, Moab, Edom, of course, Philistia, Tyre, Sidon, and Egypt. And these are all Islamic. I think that's interesting. And when you study these judgments, you'll discover the number one group in the entire Bible about which God seems to be the most intolerant is Edom, for a lot of historical reasons. And so, it's interesting, at the present time, Israel is surrounded by immediate neighbors committed to wiping them off the map. And by the way, it's misleading to call them Arabs. They're not Arabs, they're all kinds. Some are Shemites, some are Japhites, some are all three of Noah's sons. No, these are all Muslim. That's what they have in common. And it would appear that, it's my view, that there is a prerequisite victory of some kind that may establish the situation for Ezekiel 38 to take place. Because by taking on these enemies and wiping them out, they establish their borders, and they prosper, and they become secure. They become unwalled villages. They prosper enormously. There's passages in the Scripture to suggest that. And those passages can easily get confused with post-restoration passages. You've got to watch that closely. But they become the target of Ezekiel 38 for spoil. And let's not lose sight of the fact that Ezekiel 38 isn't successful. They're trying to go there for gold and silver and cattle and goods. And God says, no way. Wipes them out. Now, the traditional view of Ezekiel 38 is that's part of the Armageddon scenario. And Hal Lindsey and other good scholars hold that view. I still suspect that Ezekiel 38 happens before the 70th week of Daniel for some technical reasons. I have that view. But I think there's an event between here and that, Ezekiel 38 event, whatever it occurs, that is Psalm 83. Now, when could Psalm 83 occur? Don't know. I don't know. But the ingredients for it may not be far away. It really boils down to the initiatives of Israel. When they get tired of being pushed by the UN or by the U.S., whatever. The world will be upset and there'll be meetings and they'll grumble and who knows what. But it could be a winning strategy. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know. I don't have any reason to believe that. What I'm trying to do is get it to stand back and get a little broader perspective of the Middle East. And Psalm 83 alters my perspective on Ezekiel 38. And is Psalm 83 going to happen in the next few weeks? I wouldn't bet on that. But what's going to happen over the next 2, 3, 6, 18 months, I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me to see the whole profile in the Middle East change. And knowing Psalm 80, and one of the things I think we all are well served to do is really master this psalm. Take it to prayer. Study it. Do your own homework on these identities. In any case, it'll serve you well to really undertake a special study of the Edomites. The book of Obadiah is entirely on that subject. But there are other places too. And we could talk